Hi, listeners. This is Carin Zissis of ASCOA Online. Latin America in Focus is back from a summer break in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're excited to bring you a new episode covering some good news. As you've likely heard, 2 women are competing to be the next president of Mexico. On September 6th, the governing Morena party revealed that former Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum won its internal competition to be the presidential aspirant.
Es tiempo de mujeres.
Es un honor estar con Claudia hoy.
That announcement came a few days after the opposition Frente por México Alliance picked Senator Xóchitl Gálvez to be its own presidential rival.
Yo quiero decirles que estoy lista para lo que viene. Quiero decirles que soy una mujer valiente y trabajadora. Quiero que sepan que soy una mujer honesta que no se va a dar por vencida.
The 2 women are slated to face off in elections on June 2nd, 2024. And while other parties may back candidates or independents could appear on the ballot, Sheinbaum and Gálvez represent the 2 largest political forces in the country. As of now, it's looking like Mexico's next president will be a woman. And the news has drawn attention.
A historic first for Mexico. 2 women at the forefront of the country's presidential primaries.
Au centre de la capitale, Xóchitl Gálvez, 60 ans, est saluée par des milliers.
Por falta de uma candidata, o México tem 2 candidatas.
We don't know who Mexico's next president will be, but for the first time in the country's history, it will almost certainly be a woman.
Should one of them win, the victory would indeed be historic. After all, just 26 out of 193 heads of state worldwide are women right now. But Mexico has already been making strides when it comes to elevating women to political leadership. Women make up more than 40% of cabinet posts, the heads of both houses of Congress and the Supreme Court are women, and the country is one of only 6 in the world to have achieved gender parity in Congress. In terms of women's representation in national parliaments, it ranks 4th above countries known for gender equity like Sweden and Norway, and well above the United States, which comes in at 71. Part of what makes this all the more remarkable is that Mexican women only gained the right to vote 70 years ago in 1953. From the time Mexico transitioned from one-party rule in the late 20th century through a 2019 reform, quota rules expanded, propelling women into political roles. But even as women have achieved greater representation, skyrocketing femicide rates and persistent economic inequality have sparked a resurgent women's movement that continues to demand change.
Like, okay, who's going to win that vote of these women who are angry, who are demanding solutions, and who are not very satisfied with the current policies and the current governments that we're having.
That's Mónica Tapia. She's the co-founder of Aúna, a national organization that serves as an accelerator for women seeking political roles in Mexico, from local to federal positions. She talked with me about how women built a path to parity in Mexico and some of the paradoxes, even as representation grows.
What needs to happen is that women not only become governor or president, but that really have their power, their authority respected, and are able to lead.
Thank you for joining us. You know the drill. Help us spread the word by sharing, commenting, and subscribing at Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And check the podcast notes for links and an email for feedback.
You're listening to Latin America in Focus.
Latinoamérica en Foco.
América Latina em Foco.
A podcast by America Society, Council of the Americas on politics, economics, and culture in the region.
Mónica, Thank you for being with us. We are so excited to hear from someone who works so closely on the issue of women's political representation in Mexico, specifically to talk about this subject. So now you're the co-founder of Aúna. Can you tell our listeners a little bit what Aúna is and what you do?
Yes, great to be here. I love it. It's exciting to talk to a wider audience about what's happening in Mexico. So Aúna, we call it a political platform, but it's also an incubator of political leadership for women to enter into politics and stay in politics. So we're a membership organization, and we search, we select, we train, we accompany them, we mentor them, we coach them into being and staying in politics. And we call ourselves diverse, but together. That's also our slogan of working together, but bringing diversity and plurality and equal voices as well to these debates.
What is some of the range of types of positions that these women campaign for?
We go from the very local municipal levels, local deputies, but as well federal representatives and Senate. And this year we are starting to work with the governorship level.
Oh, wow.
Here we will have our first nominees for governors.
That's exciting. And Mexico has witnessed this incredible moment in women's leadership. The head of the Supreme Court, the heads of both houses of Congress, of the central bank, they're all women. The Secretary of the Interior is a woman. Even the head of the electoral agency is a woman. The country has achieved gender parity in Congress and in its cabinet. You know, this is an interesting moment for a country in which women first were able to participate and vote was as recently as 1955. So this clearly didn't happen overnight. Can you tell us a little bit how Mexico got to this moment? What were some of the legal changes and political shifts that allowed Mexico to arrive at this point?
Well, Mexico is a latecomer in terms of women's suffrage, women's vote. We are going to be having our 70th anniversary this October. You know, when we hear about 100 years of women's voting, we are a really latecomer. However, we had in the 70s and 80s a very good, I think, feminist leaders who got together, and they use even this plurality of democracy to work across different political parties and to push for women's quotas. And I think they obviously use this old thesis about political representation and women's rights will open others' agendas and other women's rights. And between 1990s and 2000s, they pushed a lot on the women's quotas within parties first. So very much at the electoral authority and the electoral courts. And they managed to push from quotas of 20% within parties and candidacy to 30%, 40%. And that led to parity, to the 50% within parties, but not only, let's say, rules, but also sanctions against those parties that didn't comply with. And that was really, really important. And it's all over the country. In 2019, there was this big reform, constitutional reform, that probably nobody noticed because, nobody knew how much it would reach out, but it's called Parity in all. So that means not just in candidates and obviously the legislative branch, but also executive. So that means that, even like municipal mayors have to be sometimes women, sometimes men, alternates. And then the judicial power. And that's why we have a head of the Supreme Court as women, because she's been part of these quotas and parity that has been going on for, 20 years in the Supreme Court. And that's how we got into, the Senate is 50-50. Federal Congress is also 50-50. And I would say not just these high positions, but also local Congress, as I said as well, municipal governments. And that's why they go into government and go into politics and go into being the mayor or being part of a local council.
So it sounds as though it's something that we're seeing at the top levels, but clearly also, especially based on your experience and your work, is happening down even in rural communities and at all levels, which is fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about this very top level, because something that we're seeing happen right now is that both of the main political alliances in Mexico have essentially selected women to be their likely candidates. Of course, we're 9 months away. Surprises can happen, but it's looking like these two women, Claudia Sheinbaum from the governing Morena coalition and Xóchitl Gálvez from the opposition coalition, the Frente, they've won internal selection processes. And I want to talk a little bit about these women because there are a few things that they have in common that I find quite interesting. Now, they're both very close in age. They're in their early 60s. They both have STEM backgrounds. Another frontier that's difficult for women to crack into, it's STEM. So they both have science and engineering degrees. Both of them got into politics after 2000. So after Mexico's democratic transition that ended 70 years of the pre-governance, and neither of them got their political start in the pre. I mean, some of the other candidates had gotten their start in the pre. AMLO himself, the president, got his start in the pre. So it's interesting to see these two women who came in after that democratic transition rise into these roles. Do you think that some of these characteristics help them stand out as candidates, or what their generation and their backgrounds might have to do with their leadership?
Well, definitely the education levels of these women, it's a bit of this story of Claudia has a PhD in physics and she's quite qualified in the academic field. And Xóchitl as well. Xóchitl, she's a first generation of her family going into engineering. And this is the type of education opportunities that their generation got. But obviously, these parity rules that I previously talked were very favorable for them. Well, one is a senator and the other one is the mayor or the governor of a big city, of Mexico City. So if there hadn't been any parity rules, they wouldn't have gotten those high-level positions and that political experience and skills. We had previous candidates, of course, since the 70s, but they had been always testimonial. And about 10 years ago, we had a women candidate who was third position. However, there hadn't been any parity in cabinet or in the Senate or in the Chamber of Deputies or Representatives. So I think that experience that they have, that exposure that they have, those teams they have, come from a result of this parity. The other thing they have in common, of course, is that there's a big feminist movement within the conversations, public opinion, public agenda that has been very strong as a political force questioning power, the state, demands, and of course the problems that we are facing, like security or justice or childcare, adult care, all these things, health, education. And the parties are responding a bit on that. It's like, okay, who's going to win that vote of these women who are angry, who are demanding solutions, and who are not very satisfied with the current policies and the current governments that we're having. So it's kind of a virtual circle, probably. It's because there's this feminist in a very mainstream public opinion, but as well there are candidates and women leaders with the experience and exposure and skills and the qualifications to be able to take this opportunity as well.
I'm so glad you raised that point about this resurgence of a women's movement in Mexico. We've really seen it be extremely powerful in recent years. And it sort of presents the paradox of this situation to a great degree. You know, as you said, women being angry, being frustrated, taking to the streets. You know, I think about a mural that I watched over the years. It's in for people who know Mexico City, it's in San Miguel Chapultepec, and it has a count on it of how many women are killed in Mexico each day. And years ago, it was like it had an announcement that 6 women a day were killed. And I remember that at a certain point, they X'd out the 6 on the mural and they had to change it to 10, that at least 10 women are killed in Mexico every day. And we've seen a real frustration and a real protest against violence against women and for women's rights. I mean, it's quite incredible that the day that Claudia Sheinbaum was named a candidate, the Supreme Court essentially decriminalized abortion at a federal level. So we're seeing sort of a demand for women's rights, and we're seeing a frustration over violence against women and a lack of economic equality. Of course, in Mexico, we also have this challenge that women are not in the labor force to the same degree as men. And how do you explain this paradox that at the same time and over the very same period that we're seeing women rise to leadership positions, we're also seeing this challenge of women facing rising violence in Mexico and a demand for economic equality?
Yes, of course. I mean, this history that I'm telling about parity and women's leadership is not without conflicts. Within the virtuous circle, there's also this paradox of patriarchy and male power within the parties. All of the leaders of the party system that we have are men. They have extended their legal mandate and they have moved around their own internal rules in order to keep the power. And there's also this discipline and submission within party discipline. The things we see with women leaders entering politics is this unwritten rules about how very much men make pacts, patriarchal pacts, and that's how they deal with the candidates, with the votes, what is passed on Congress or Senate and what is not. It's not a harmonized history. And we're also seeing in many countries, like outside of Mexico, Latin America, but now here, these men out of nowhere from the extreme right, like in Spain, coming up saying like, I mean, we had enough of these women. We are not going to take it. We want the traditional roles. The women go back to their homes, please. The family values, all these things. So I think it's really a cultural war, like in the US, very much on those traditional roles, on the women's education and role in society. And obviously the system, and I think also talking a little bit about the agenda that needs to be pushed is like we need really a caring system with the elderly, with the children, in order to go to work. We do the traditional role of caring for our families. So that's one of the paradoxes. And that's one of the obstacles for women to go to and have a stable job. Most of them are within the informal sector that gives more flexibility to women and allows them to combine domestic and workforce.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One person who might demonstrate these conflicts very much is the president himself. He's been a somewhat controversial figure in terms of women's rights. On the one hand, there was even a case where the electoral agency said that his criticisms of Xóchitl Gálvez, of the opposition candidate, constituted gender-based violence. And he countered, well, the attacks against me, don't those count as gender-based violence, which drew a lot, was very controversial. And he's taken some other steps that have been controversial in terms of women's access to childcare. But on the other hand, many argue that he's really helped open the door for women. He was very supportive of Claudia Sheinbaum in her role as Mexico City mayor, and she's been viewed as one of his top choices to be the next president. And he also has a gender-balanced cabinet. What do you think of AMLO and his role in terms of ushering in this parity that we're seeing?
He's a good representative of this patriarchal control and power that he doesn't want to let go. And I think this type of men also usually make good pairs with submissive women. I mean, who are disciplined and who obey and who understand that their role is to obey and then go forward. And we have all that also. I mean, among this party, we also call, there's a lot of women who are family members and have ties with these leaders at male leaders within the parties. And so they are the ones that say yes, and they are the ones that ask how to vote, and they are the ones sometimes that bring their husbands and in-laws to whatever thing. So we know it's a paradox where we talk about women in the position or in the public charge or the agency, however, without power or without authority. And that's also part of this paradox. I mean, a lot of women who are the mayor in the municipality, however, the power is really with their husbands in the second door at the right. Things like that. That's also part of this phenomenon. And that's why we also, as a platform, we call the leadership incubator. Really, what needs to happen is that women not only become governor or president, but that really have their power, their authority respected, and are able to lead, and not lead as males patriarchal, hierarchical way, but in a way that's more collaborative, that's more into the listening and dialogue and bringing others who know and mobilizing different expertise and the collective knowledge that there's in the room. That's what we talk about also, about a type of leadership we want to promote among these women.
It seems as though it's not just that women need to get the positions, they need to also get the power. And thinking about that, regardless of who might win the next presidential election, we are seeing women in these leadership positions at all levels. And it's happened very, very quickly in recent years. What is your hope for how it can change Mexico in the near future? And what do you think should change in terms of women's leadership?
Yes, women need to hold more power and learn to lead, I would say. But also, given the plurality and diversity context we are at, and the complex problems we need to face, I mean, even this system care or pacification of Mexico and gender equality or social security reform, all these are big issues. There's sometimes the danger of wanting to do it with a fist, with a strong hand, and align everyone in a hierarchical way, and then win these super majorities and use those super majorities in Congress and Senate to push certain reforms that the leader wants. And that has been probably in the last years that we had the Morena government. We are not going to see that in the next election. Morena, I would think it will lose those super majorities, and we will come back to this moment where nobody had majorities, and it was very difficult to agree and to pass reforms and even the budget. And of course, in the US, you also know about these stalemates and impasses. And it's difficult in a polarized context, which we're living now. So our hope is also women who learn to lead, but learn to make agreements and learn to make consensus among different parties. We are helping women to see that diversity and plurality as a positive thing that they need to work with, and that we are, as women, we are socializing to more a bigger empathy and listeners, and we're working with those values to bring big reforms, substantial transformations at the social level. That's our hope. That's really our hope for the future.
Thank you so much. I'm interested to see if your forecasts of the congressional breakdown and how it shifts will come true. So we'll have to check back in next June to see what happened. Thank you so much, Monica, for speaking with me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Love to come back and speak again.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Carin Zissis. This episode was produced by our executive producer, Luisa Lemming. Learn more about Mexico's 2024 vote with our election guide at www.as-coa.org/2024. And find out about ASUA programming focused on women in leadership at www.as-coa.org/women. The music in this podcast was performed by La Bruja de Texcoco at America Society in New York City. Find out about upcoming concerts at musicoftheamericas.org. You can access other episodes of Latin American Focus at www.as-coa.org/podcast and send us feedback at latamfocus@as-coa.org. Share and subscribe at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.